Alright, good evening, folks. This is Foghorn. And I hope I actually got things set up right. Yeah, it looks like I do. Okay, so you should be getting signal. And it looks like it's coming through. Alright. So we're back for another one. A little bit of flight school tonight. This will be a quick one. We're just going to go over literally Comm discipline brevity code about Comm itself. So a little bit of circularity there. As always, I've got this Twitch stream chat up over on the alternate monitor. So if you guys need to ask a question, please stop me as we go. I am monitoring the chat, so you just post your question up there, and I will repeat it so everybody can hear it, and then answer it as best I can. Remember, there is about an 8-second delay from probably when you hit enter before it actually comes up on my screen, so there will be a delay before you hear me answer back or acknowledge that that you posted a question. Okay, so it should be short, and then we can get to flying for tonight. For anybody else who's not an Aurora Republic citizen, this is Foghorn, and this is our weekly academics, or our attempt at weekly academics. So we will get to it post-haste and get through. All right, so we're going to talk a little bit about comm networks, then get to some brevity. There's basically really two grand schemes of how comm networks work when you're talking about sort of large force employment out in the universe. These two grand categories is sort of what we'd call a vertical schema or a horizontal schema. Typical surface forces, if you're talking about modern day militaries, you'll typically see a more vertical sort of a comm scheme where it's based on the assumption that everybody only has a single channel radio capability, like a walkie-talkie or a land mobile radio. So a squad will each be in comms with the squad leader, but the squad leader will be the only one that has dual channel capability to be able to talk up the chain of command. And then all of the links in the chain of command all the way up each have some sort of a dual channel or dual radio capability, so they can talk to both the subordinates below them and the higher command units above them. It's good and bad for the exact same reason, and it comes down to the compartmentalization of situational awareness. When you're talking about typical surface military components, typically like to compartmentalize information. The infantryman doesn't need to be hearing what the general is saying. He really is only concerned with what his platoon leader is saying. So the vertical sort of scheme allows that compartmentalization to happen. It's also its biggest detriment, is that it compartmentalizes that situational awareness to where something may be known at a higher echelon, but unless it's completely incumbent upon all of the links in that vertical chain, all of those people in leadership positions to properly relay information up and down the chain to make sure that everybody is informed of what they need to be informed of. Anyway, aviation tends to work a little bit different. This is both military and civilian aviation, and therefore mostly of what I'm talking about when I talk about my desire to have dual channel capabilities, or even more than dual, multiple channel capabilities within the game, within Star Citizen. And that's basically that in aviation, the assumption is that all players have a multi-channel capability, and what you'll typically see is formations of aircraft that are working together will have an auxiliary frequency that's just their own personal intra-flight frequency, so that they can discuss, share, and talk back and forth amongst themselves without cluttering up the bigger frequency, which is, as you see in the diagram here, is kind of that gray, larger bubble of which would be kind of a primary frequency, which would only be command and control, or in civilian flying, that would be something like the ARTC, the Houston Center, would be talking the air traffic control stuff over that frequency. However, if there was a formation, like a formation flight, say a military formation flight that happens to be going from A to B, not in a military operating area, but just out in the normal civilian aerospace structure, then the formation would have their own auxiliary frequency as well on the other radio to be able to talk amongst themselves. This scheme works the same as far as who talks on that primary frequency, that frequency that everybody's listening to, is only the leaders of the unit leaders would typically do the speaking, unless of course they're somehow unable to at the moment, so they might have their deputy element lead answer a call for them or something similar. But the advantage of a horizontal scheme like this is that the situational awareness is shared. A controlling agency only has to say it once, and basically everybody who's up on that primary frequency should have at least heard it. And it reduces the workload on all of those other nodes, on all of those leaders of each subunit, so that they don't have to sit here and just feel like they're just a parrot, simply parroting back what the higher echelon of command told them to tell everybody. Every echelon only has to say it once, and everybody knows about it. That's it in a nutshell for comm networks. There's really kind of two big schemes of how to do it. That's it. So let's get to the brevity so that we can get to the flying. This is actually our brevity comm, as you'll find in our version 1.3 document that is hung on Spectrum, linked on Discord. It's also on our Google Drive, so you can get to it there. So there's be plenty of places you should be able to get your hands on it. Okay, so there's not much here. Very quickly, as fragged simply means that when you're reporting into a command and control agency, you'll say as fragged if that means there are no changes to what was written down in the tasking order. So if you guys are showing up exactly as the tasking order is said, that saves you breath. It saves you brain bites and words that you have to say to Mad Dog when you're checking in on the frequency, or whatever the controlling agency is that you're checking on the frequency. You could simply check in and say Eagle Flight is fragged. Okay, Mad Dog copies. So he knows you're here exactly in the same manner, the numbers, the type of aircraft, ordnance, all of it. On time, all of that sort of stuff in accordance with what the tasking order was. Tasking orders discussion is in the terms of reference towards the second half of the brevity code document. The first half, obviously, if you haven't looked at it yet, the first half is the massively long vocabulary list of brevity words, which we are going through in small, hopefully digestible chunks. And then the second half of the document is sort of concepts and sort of a glossary of concepts. They aren't brevity codes in and of themselves, but they're sort of ideas borrowed pretty much from the military for how the Aurora Republic Department of Defense is going to run. Anyway, so as fragged. Authenticate, that is pretty much exactly what the word obviously means. That is a challenge for you to respond with a proper authentication code. So you check in at a frequency, Mad Dog, Eagle 1 checking in as fragged. Mad Dog copies, Eagle 1 authenticate, Charlie Foxtrot. You guys would then, whoever the Eagle Flight lead would be look down at his e-board, see what the coded authentication is for the day. When he'd look up Charlie Foxtrot, and he'd come back and give the proper response. That's what would be the authenticate. Brevity. Brevity is typically a I don't want to say it's a complaint. Somebody will holler brevity. They won't even use a call sign. They'll just holler brevity over a frequency when it starts to get garbaged up with too much trucker comm, too much blah blah blah. It's like, frequencies becoming saturated. Everybody needs to be briefer and adhere more strictly to brevity code. Button simply is a channel preset. If we ever get, I probably should actually have that grayed out because we're not really sure yet exactly how radios are communication systems are going to work in Star Citizen. We're still waiting on that whole, VoIP is coming in Spectrum in the near future. We're still waiting to see on that. The way this would be used, button is simply a channel preset, so it would be push button 3. If button 3 is the tower frequency. Radios both can, you can actually dial in on aviation type radios. You can dial in specific frequencies, so you can dial in 128.5, or you could actually have 128.5 memorized into a button preset, and that's where the word button came from, or the usage of the word button in that way. Okay, buzzer is communications jamming. It's usually some sort of a barrage noise jamming. So if somebody were able to get up on our frequency and just have some sort of a device that just went, just filled the frequency with some sort of a barrage noise, like, static, or some sort of sounds like an air horn or something like that, it could effectively keep you from being able to talk to each other, because it's just painful to even try to listen to, because it's just this barrage noise. That is not to be confused with deception, which is a little bit different. Now, there's another word for that on the next slide here, or two. So buzzer is the word when we're talking about communications jamming. And it's directly tied to the next word that we're going to talk about, which is chattermark. When you use the word chattermark, you're telling everybody to push to whatever the next channel in the pre-briefed anti-buzzer plan. So if somebody gets up on your frequency and starts using some professional comm jammer gets up there and starts using a buzzer of some flavor, then hopefully, if your mission commander has his fecal material consolidated in the same sock, before you guys ever stepped to fly, you would have been pre-briefed on what the anti-buzzer plan is, the chattermark plan. And if you hear the buzzer, then you automatically chattermark to the next frequency. Somebody like a mission commander might actually yell, trying to bust over top of that buzzer and yell chattermark, chattermark, chattermark on a frequency, which would command everybody, hey, try to push to that next one. Now, they're not going to say what the frequency they're going to is when they yell chattermark, or at least if they have one freaking operating synapse in their head, they're not going to yell what frequency they're going to. Okay, you're supposed to know that before you step. If there is even going to be such things as communications jamming. If we can, if VoIP over Spectrum proves to be crap, which I'm giving it a 50-50 that it'll be what we want or it'll be crap, then we will be looking for a different venue to, probably Discord, to use as our in-org communications even when we fly. So that's kind of what we have the aux and the primary frequencies set up down in the defense, or down in the operations voice chat windows. And that should hopefully, if we've set it up right, that should prevent us ever needing to use a chattermark or a buzzer. But you could theoretically, some adversary org could figure out how to get onto our server, could get into one of there, and then buzzer us big time, which we would have to come up with a chattermark plan, hopefully beforehand. So again, that all probably should also be gray. Go active, go clear, and go secure are all modes of radios that we have no idea if that'll ever exist in Star Citizen, or if we'll ever be able to build it outside of Star Citizen if the VoIP over Spectrum is crap. Go active is specifically an anti-jam mode on radios. Go clear is to come out from it. Go secure is to use voice encryption. That's different than jam. Encryption is actually just what it says. It's encrypted voice, so you guys can talk without people being able to listen in and be able to hear. It's a scrambler, in other words, to use sort of an old colloquialism. And go clear is to unscramble or unencrypt the voice communications. Have no idea if any of that will be built in or if there will even be a need for it. But they're there temporarily, just so we don't have to add them in later if it suddenly shows up. Pogo. Pogo, it's just like it kind of implies, it's like a pogo stick. A flight lead may tell the flight, hey, you push button 3, pogo 4. If they pogo, that simply means to stay on the first frequency for the expected amount of time and then end up on the other frequency. Now, what's the expected amount of time? Well, it would be pretty obvious in what they were telling you to pogo to. In modern aviation, the most often used case of this is when they're pushing somebody what's called ATIS, which is the Automated Terminal Information System. So as they're approaching their airfield, they would say everybody to pogo button X, or they say, hey, push button X, pogo Y. Button X would be ATIS, so they would, if ATIS was button 3, the flight would push to button 3, listen for one cycle of ATIS, which is weather information in other words, and it's just a recording that's on a loop. So they listen to one cycle of that loop, and then they would show up on whatever button Y was. So if it was 3 Pogo 4, then button 3 would probably be ATIS. They would listen for one cycle of ATIS, and they'd show up on button 4. Flight lead, when he gets to button 4, he give a few extra seconds for the rest of his flight to get there, just because you're doing this without any additional comms, and then he would just simply check his flight in, and hopefully everybody shows up. If somebody doesn't answer, then maybe he would wait for another 30 seconds for whatever would be one more cycle, and then check them in again. If the flight lead doesn't say the Y part of Pogo, if it says, hey, button 3 Pogo, and leaves the second one blank, it means come back to this button, to this frequency that we're on. So if we're on button 10 and I go 3 Pogo, then you guys go to button 3 for one cycle of whatever it is there, whatever the reasonable amount of time to go listen on button 3 is, and then come right back to to where we left. Okay, and last one. All right. Again, you already heard me use push a couple of times. There's push from a mission direction standpoint of Eagle, Viper, Talon, and Herc are pushing. That's we're pushing off from a push point. If it's set as an order, that's usually, particularly with if it's joined with the word button, that is a radio change. So push button 3, or if it's not a preset button, then you would give them the actual push 286.3. That tells everybody that's no acknowledgments required from the rest of the flight. I just told you guys to switch your radios to whatever X is. Negative, Roger, and Unable and Wilco and Say Again we discussed in the block 0, so I'm not going to go over those here. Nordo is the term for an inoperative radio, so and so is Nordo. Spoofer, and this is the last one for the evening. Spoofer is the similar to buzzer being comm jamming. Spoofer, or a spoofing, is somebody who is employing communications deception, voice deception. So I'll use a modern day example again. So here we are at red flag, and the aggressors playing red air figure out what blue air's frequencies are. And if the white force, when they built the whole scenario for the 2 weeks, said, communications jamming is approved, yes, that's a part of this scenario, then if red air can figure out what the blue air frequencies are, then they can set up a buzzer. So they actually have equipment that'll do that. Or they may just, hey, number 3, you're our spoofer for today. Stay on our aux frequency so we can all talk to each other. But instead of you being on prime, you could get up on blue prime and then do some spoofing. And so he's going to listen for a while, and he's going to sit here with a pen and a piece of paper down on his kneeboard, and he's going to write down people's call signs and all that sort of stuff. And then at an opportune time, he's going to give radio calls, faker radio calls, and see if he can cause some confusion and mayhem over on the blue comm network. That's a spoofer. It's not denying communications, it's putting fake information into those communications. And that can be extremely difficult to recognize from the victim side. So if red air is doing it to blue air as part of a training scenario, it can be, if they're good at it, it can be very hard to recognize that there's a spoofer in amongst those call signs and radio calls. With the example I used earlier with buzzer, some adversary org figuring out how to get onto our protected servers if we end up off of Spectrum, and just setting up some computer program that just blasts us with a bunch of noise jamming, barrage noise, could disable that channel. But it could be more dangerous if they listen in, get some names, and if they're even remotely decent at copying people's vocal styles, and could actually get in there and start sounding like Mad Dog and start giving people bad direction and all of that sort of stuff. So spoofing can be a very difficult nut to crack from the victim side. Or it ends up being somebody that is so bad. If Red Air is really bad at doing spoofing, and Blue Air, the second the guy opens his mouth, Blue Air realizes who it is, that it's not one of theirs, then spoofing actually becomes somewhat comical because it's sort of the inept trying. It's the 3-year-old trying to be sneaky, and Dad's just looking at him, going, "I know what you're doing." So, anywho, that's it in a nutshell. Let's get to some flying. Nobody posted any questions. That's either because they've had enough of ever listening to me and looking at my stupid slides, or because it was so short, I didn't give them an opportunity to ask any questions. So, either of those works for me. Anywho, we will see you. I'm coming off of Twitch, and I will be back up in the Discord in a couple minutes. And as soon as I get the system set down, and we will go out and figure out something to do. I have a lot of requests from a whole bunch of different people on things to do, so we're going to have to count noses and talk a little bit, figure out what we're going to go do. I've had some people who want to go play Star Marine. I got some people who want to load up a Connie or a Retaliator and do some gunnery work, like turrets, how well can this thing defend itself, that sort of stuff. I got some other people who want to do some sort of a multi-force exercise, but that's really going to depend on how many folks are here to play. So, all right, you have yourself the rest of a morning, noon, day, or evening as appropriate. Thanks.